Friederike, you have had some spiritual experiences in your life, and in addition, you have memories of prenatal events from your childhood. Can you tell us about your experiences? I still remember when I was in kindergarten, maybe I was about 3 or 4 years old. Well, there are different things I still remember. I also remember strolling through streets of light in a kind of light body, having, however, the figure of a child, and being so happy to somehow realize, oh, goody, I've made it, I'm light. And then, somehow from above, someone said, yes, that's right, you've made it, or you are light. But this was really too easy. So I was overcome by a kind of feeling that I had died far too young without having experienced much of life at all, and that it would therefore be easy to remain innocent because one hadn't yet come into contact with real problems, real challenges, and that it would therefore be easy to become light after death. So I would therefore have to return to earth anyway, whereby I then had such a dislike toward the earthly, or towards having to go back to this earthly life, that I just wanted to stay over there. So I said, I don't want. Then it was like, well, okay, you don't have to. You can stay here, but at some point you will be willing to go back on your own. You won't be able to get along here. Anyway, I was happy and thought, okay, so I'll stay here. And I continued strolling around, then seeing larger, grown-up looking figures walking around everywhere. I admired them. I somehow found them totally beautiful. I perceived something like empathy in their eyes, wisdom, but I couldn't ask these beings anything. We couldn't talk to each other. I only saw their glances, and I thought that they must have experienced something that I hadn't, something that had made them so great, so wise. Then I was all the more interested in what there is that I hadn't yet experienced, and was still to experience. But all of this didn't happen in complex thoughts, like it does just at this moment. It was all the more like a feeling. So I felt it all at once. The moment I decided to go back to Earth, after all, something went pop, and then I was back close to this huge ball of light, so to speak. So I then wished to return to Earth again, based on the motto, then I'll just do it. And what is also interesting in my memory is that I actually looked at this childlike body of light as if from above, but not in a way that you somehow are looking out of the body from the inside, just as in this moment, but rather that you see this body from above. And I somehow knew that this is my body, of which, when hearing it talk, you still know that it is me. So I also said that, well, what I remember as well is that the moment I even noticed this ball of light, I somehow felt so thankful that I was allowed to see it at all. But I don't know what I could call it, whether it was God or angels or spiritual guides, or however it could be designated. In any case, I felt that this was something enormously great, valuable, and I became so humble, being allowed to stand before it, talking to it, and I said to it that I well understood I was to go back, but that I would like to get into a family that had a bit more money, then again, not too much of it. And that I would like to have access to spirituality in whatever way. The main thing is that I would have access to it. Furthermore, that I would like to remember who I am. That's it. So you set conditions, so to speak. Yes, exactly. It's comparable to a small child standing there, chatting and babbling, finally saying, yes, but if I do such and such, I want this and that. Can this be summarized by saying you personally were already living before and that you had died early as a child, whereafter you incarnated again relatively quickly? Could we put it that way? Well, this is my interpretation in retrospect, because I have no concrete pictorial memories of a life before my present life. But I do have memories of an interim period when I was told that I had died too early and had not yet gained enough experience. And my intuition tells me that I must have lived in poverty at some point, and that I might have died from it. But it's just an interpretation or a feeling of mine, but I can't say that it's a real memory. You had this memory as a small child, but in a sense, it's amazing that you still remember it today. Do you have an explanation for that? Yes, insofar as I somehow felt at the time that it wasn't good or wise to talk to my parents about it, because I can dimly remember that they told me that you cannot remember things that happened before the age of 3. And I thought that if this is the reality for them, then I can't talk to them about something like this anyway. Because I was afraid they would think I was crazy, just saying that it was only a dream. And I felt that it would have hurt me to hear them say that it was just a dream. And that's why I didn't want to tell anyone. Anyway, I went through certain stages in my youth where I completely rejected these things. So as a young teenager, I rejected things like God and everything related to that, thinking that things like that didn't exist. I also had something against Christians and believers. Well, I fondly assumed that I had only imagined it all, or something like that, but it all came back when my father died, and I had an encounter with him. After that, I had to pursue my studies, but in my early adulthood, I came back to spirituality, also through meditation and some other different things, as well as through others increasingly talking about having had such experiences, and that these were described in a way similar to what I experienced. So it all got a name, and I thought to myself, if other people are experiencing something similar, it can't have been just a dream, because there are obviously elements that others, too, have experienced and are reporting on. And now it's just up to me to believe that what I experienced was real. Friederike, at the age of 14, you had another near-death experience. How did this come about? I always used to have severe pain when menstruating, to the point that I often was dizzy from the pain. And one day, with my pals, we were playing sports at school. And when we went to another building, I was physically so exhausted that I went back with 2 friends up a steep hill, and this meant even more physical exertion. And at some point, I was so exhausted that I had to sit down on a rock while the other 2 had to wait. They were just talking to each other without noticing how I suddenly became so weak inside that it felt like 1,000 threads, a kind of threads of consciousness emanating from the soul. I have no idea. I don't know what kind of threads they are. They seem to somehow detach themselves in order to somehow glide upwards. And then, well, a kind of convulsive clinging was developing inside me then, like, I can't let this happen now. I can't just collapse now. I was also afraid. Can I die so suddenly? I also thought that it couldn't be possible to die just menstrual pains alone, especially since I had no injuries at all, and that the worst that could happen was that I would faint and that I would wake up as soon as my body felt better again. But I still didn't want to just collapse in front of my friends, so I tried somehow to hold on to these strings, and actually the painful thing about it was this cramping, but it was gone very quickly, and I found myself outside my body. So it just simply felt like a transition when I was no longer in this body. Well, how can I put it? It was like being in an empty space, full of shelteredness. There was no problem, no pain, and it wasn't like I had moved in any way either. It was as if I had stayed on this earthly plane, and somehow I couldn't get away from this earth. Well, how shall I describe it? Did you see your body from outside? No, I didn't see it from outside. It was as if my body was just simply gone, or I was just simply away from it. Anyway, it was no longer in my consciousness, my body. But there was a kind of extended, wide space, and it felt as if this space was on Earth, at least in the vicinity of the Earth, and that I wasn't transported away because I was not going to die. Rather, I was just waiting, as if in a kind of waiting room, in order to go back into my body again. How did you experience returning to your body? Well, it wasn't like entering, but it was just as if a page would have been turned, whereupon I was back in this physical existence, where I then was in pain again, and I also had this feeling of dizziness again. So I finally found myself lying on the ground, again feeling ashamed in front of my friends. So I got up straight away, and even though I was feeling so bad, I controlled myself and got up again, asking if something had happened and how long I had been lying there. Well, they said, actually not that long at all. You just fell off this stone and then you just got up again. So they didn't even realize at all, even though this was unbelievable for me, because it felt like the whole thing had lasted an eternity. And if they had said that I had been lying there for a week, I would have believed them. Because for me, it felt like I had a very long experience in that state of being. But evidently, I had broken down only for a very short time. You said before that you had an encounter with your deceased father. Can you tell us about that? When I was 19, my father died suddenly. We don't know exactly what it was, maybe due to an aneurysm or a sudden heart attack. It was even the day before his 53rd birthday. So neighbors brought me home from the student dormitory, and when I arrived, my father was taken away by the funeral home. And we were so helpless and traumatized that we said to ourselves, since we can't do anything at the moment anyway, we could at least go for a walk. So I went for a walk with my mother and my brothers. The whole time we were asking ourselves, where is he now? And I repeatedly asked them, is he all right now? Where might he be? Constantly having the feeling that he might hear us. Another thing was, when back at home, I went down to the cellar to get something, and I kept saying to myself, please, if you're buzzing around here somewhere as a spirit, don't appear to me. I'm afraid to see you at this moment, because I don't know what it will be like. So there was nothing. In the evening, that night in bed, when I was about to fall asleep, I consciously experienced the transition from the waking state to the sleeping state, although I don't usually experience this consciously. But I consciously experienced how I felt from a waking state into a free fall, and that kind of pulling or shaking came from the edge of the bed. And at that moment, I came out of this fall, whereupon I fell into another plane. And there I saw my father sitting on the edge of the bed. I didn't feel disembodied. Rather, we both were these light figures, again, that were making me remember a state before birth, when his figure consisted of light and mine too. It all happened very quickly. He was moving up the attic stairs, and I was hovering behind him. And I can still remember exactly how I was looking at all this very consciously, how amazed I was about it all, and also about how this was possible after all. I wasn't at all afraid of my father. So all of this wasn't threatening at all, but actually quite beautiful and bright. When we finally were in the attic, I realized that the attic room looked completely different from usual. And this reminded me of what I told my father many times when I was a child. Namely, I had often described to him how I imagined such a place of worship. Well, I used to imagine it as a very simple wooden house that is quite small and doesn't actually contain anything you don't need, because there are all the beautiful souls in this house creating a cozy warmth through their presence, thus making everything there quite beautiful, and that no valuable objects would be needed for that, and therefore this would only be a simple, small wooden house. And somehow this attic was suddenly built exactly as I had used to always describe it to my father, as well made of this simple wood. There was also a kind of wooden stool, and also 2 chairs, a small table with a candle on it, and I immediately remembered it and also felt that it had intentionally been created like this, as if an illusion of it all had been created, so that I immediately would feel comfortable knowing where I am. And my father said to me, sit down here. So we sat down, so to speak, even though we didn't have a physical body. And then he said, I was allowed to see you again. Whereupon I also asked myself questions like, who allowed him to see me? And who is it saying he's allowed to do that? Anyway, he said he was allowed to see me again, to show me that he was alive and well. So this was basically the answer to the question I had been asking myself and my mother all day long. Well, I told him that I realized exactly when I was leaving my body in my sleep, being well aware of the fact that my body was lying down there sleeping. So how can I know that this is nothing but a dream? And he just looked at me very seriously, saying, listen, this is now and here, here and now you see me. And the fact that now you are here and I am here, seeing each other, you see me, isn't that proof enough for us that in this moment it's real? So I replied that I cannot say anything against it in this special situation because it is just too real in this moment. Also, because I'm seeing this right now. Moreover, I thought that if I now rejected this insight for the reason that it's not real after all, this would be too stupid. So I savored the moment of being allowed to see him again and to recognize it as real. Because if I wouldn't, I would be giving away such a precious moment. And I somehow just accepted it. So we just were sitting there. Then we were somehow hugging each other. It's interesting that without a body, just by means of a light body, a hug works in such a way that you sit inside each other with the light bodies overlapping. And that way you touch each other. So we actually were sitting there the whole time, just sitting within our light bodies, somehow embracing each other. I somehow knew that he was in no hurry, that he could stay as long as I needed him. And the only time limit was that my body would wake up and I would have returned again all by itself. I wanted this state of being to remain forever and never end. So I thought, I hope my body won't wake up again. But I finally woke up in the middle of the night. So the night wasn't over yet, and I couldn't go back to sleep thereafter because I was thinking about it the whole time. Anyway, I definitely decided to tell everyone about it because it was such a real encounter for me that I thought they must believe me if I tell them in this way. Well, the next morning, I told everyone about it at breakfast, but their reaction was what you might have expected, namely, that everyone said they didn't believe me and that it had probably been a nice dream. Only my aunt, who also believes a bit in things like this, immediately said that she believed all of this and that it was really my father I had met. What impact did all these exceptional experiences have on your life, on your worldview? I thought about what it would mean for me if I remembered the pre-birth period, also in terms of why I had to go back to Earth, and that if everyone knew why they were on Earth, this would probably have a major influence on how you live your life, or how to understand things you experience, or what you are making out of it. Whether you fall into depression when facing difficulties, or see them as challenges, thinking, oh, God or an angel wanted to make me understand this, and that's why I should go back to face it. And that's what I think. Even if difficult moments are to come again, is this what I'm supposed to go through now in order to grow mentally, in order to become like these great bodies of light that I met there when I asked myself, what did they do differently, or how did they gain their wisdom? So I may see certain things as a challenge, assuming that there must be a way to make sense of it, therefore just simply facing them, asking myself what this or that experience is trying to teach me, how to grasp it, or in retrospect, asking myself, only after death, and having returned into this light body, Did this or that teach me anything I would not have been able to learn inside this light body? Could you say that the conditions imposed on this light by you as a child have been fulfilled? Yes, all of them. And I think that what I sometimes thought about as a child was also something that I often in general had thought about, because everything was really true. And this indeed used to give me goosebumps each time, also conveying a feeling like, this can't all be true. Well, I remember setting these conditions, and afterwards they all in fact came true. So I belong to a family where my parents are teachers. My mother is still alive and retired, and even though not particularly wealthy, we do not belong to the super rich people, yet there is enough money to live on. My father took me to children's church at an early age because I wanted to have access to spirituality, and to be in the children's church. It was my own desire, but my parents actually didn't want to bring me there. But when they realized how much I loved it, I grew quite a bit there. I was totally fascinated by what I heard there, and also by the singing. And whenever I entered the church, I saw this light there, so that my eyes would shine. My mother and father told me that my eyes would somehow be shining there, but it also scared them somehow. So they considered taking me out of the children's church. But nevertheless, I still had further access to spirituality, something that I was still able to preserve for myself, as well as the memory. And that way, all 3 wishes I had made came true. And at this point, I used to always think to myself that if all this is real, and it must all be real, then this divine being, or this angelic being, whatever it was, must somehow really love me and want the best for me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been given everything I wished for. Friederike, thank you so much for the interview. You are most welcome.